Hello, my dear children. So today we will be learning about nitrogen cycle. Many of my students feel that carbon cycle is easy, water cycle is easy, but then they feel nitrogen cycle becomes really tough and very confusing. So let's remove those confusions and let's aim to score the stars. Okay, so here we go. So first let us learn about the nitrogen. It is an element and it is important to make proteins. I hope all of you all know that all the proteins to be made need nitrogen in it. And from where do we get this nitrogen? It is all in the air. You have all the nitrogen in the air. And can our body take up this nitrogen? No. Our body can never, break the nitrogen in the atmosphere. Because nitrogen is made up of two atoms held together by a triple bond. Now this triple bond is so strong that it cannot be broken unless there is a substantial amount of energy which is used to break this bond. And what is that substantial amount of energy is what we are going to learn. Because only when the bonds break, nitrogen will get added up with oxygen which is in the atmosphere and will be converted into usable forms. Okay, so now let's talk about what happens. Why doesn't our body use it up? As you know, nitrogen is made up of these triple bonds and it is kind of very inert. It cannot be broken down. It cannot be broken down. So what happens now let's go back to respiration. The composition of the air, oxygen, which is 21% in the atmosphere, gets into the body, and during exhalation it comes out as 16%. So where did the percentage reduce? All the oxygen was used up in respiration. When you talk about carbon dioxide, 0.04% gets in, but when the exhalation happens, it's 4%. So now this has increased, which means that there is a lot of carbon dioxide released during respiration, which adds on to the percentage. But what about nitrogen? So nitrogen is 78%, and this 78% during exhalation remains 78% without being used, because our body does not have the capacity to use it. Our body does not have the capacity to use it. Okay, so now let's get back. Now let's see how this nitrogen is converted into usable form. Okay, so here we go. Let's begin. So nitrogen cycle, you actually need to know three major processes that are happening in the nitrogen cycle. First is fixation, nitrogen fixation, and the other is how the nitrogen is released back into the atmosphere. So denitrification. Now when you talk about fixation of nitrogen, there are two ways in which nitrogen is broken and fixed into the soil, where the plants can absorb it, where it can become into usable form. So these fixations are naturally, okay? I'm not talking about industrial fixation. We are just talking about natural fixation. So the first one is nitrogen fixing bacteria. Nitrogen fixing bacteria. And then we have lightning. So now when we talk about lightning, so there are as I told you, there are two types of fixation that are happening. One is by nitrogen fixing bacteria and the other by lightning. Now, if you talk about lightning has that substantial amount of energy which can break the bond, which can break this triple bond and can separate the nitrogen gas. It can split the bond between those two atoms, and what happens immediately the moment the bonds are broken down, now free nitrogen molecules, they get converted into nitrogen dioxide, or we can say oxides of nitrogen or nitrous oxide or nitrogen dioxide, and they dissolve in rain. Happily they dissolve in rain, and then they get into the soil. But do you think they are now ready to be absorbed by the plants? No. They are still not ready to be absorbed by the plants, because plants can only absorb nitrates. So they are still not in the form to be absorbed, because you remember this, nitrogen is required to make proteins. Okay, so plants can absorb only nitrates that they find in the soil. So what happens is you have conversions. Nitrogen dioxide gets converted to nitrates. Okay, now nitrates, what is the formula of nitrates? NO3 minus. Yeah, so it gets converted into nitrates, and then the use of nitrogen in them is to make proteins. So this is just one part which I've told you now. So lightning, what it does, it breaks the bonds, releases the molecules of nitrogen, and they get combined with the oxygen that is there in the atmosphere, dissolve in water, and they come down. And this nitrogen dioxide gets converted into nitrates, and only then plants can absorb them and make proteins. Now what happens? Now the nitrates that are there in plants, okay, they are there in plants. Now from plants they get into animals. So how do they get into animals? Of course, the animals are going to eat them up. So once the animals eat the plants, all the nitrogen gets into the animals, and there the proteins are made by protein synthesis. I'm sure all of you all know what is protein synthesis. The amino acids, all the amino acids are synthesized, are put together to make different molecules of protein. Now, what happens to these animals now? Now, these animals can defecate, okay? They are waste products. They could just urinate, or, okay, let me write this down: urine, feces. So all these waste products that are coming from animals has nitrogen in it. It all has nitrogen in it. Now this nitrogen is kind of sent back into the soil. Now it is not in the form of, it is in the form of ammonium. Okay. So now this ammonium compound, which is there in urea or urine or whatever feces, they all contain nitrogen. Now this ammonia needs to be converted into what? Yeah, you got it right. It has to be converted into nitrates, because only then the plants can absorb it and again convert it to proteins, and the cycle goes on and on and on. Okay, so this is when the animals are defecating. Fine. Now let's go to animals and plants. What happens when they die? When the animals and plants, which have a lot of protein content in them, when they die, all the proteins are broken down into ammonium compounds. Again, they are broken down into ammonium compounds. So all the decay bacteria are going to act on them and all the proteins inside them are broken down to ammonium compounds. Okay, so when plants and animals die, all the decay bacteria, they are going to break the dead matter. Okay, decay bacteria are going to break them down into ammonium compounds. So now we have come to this level where everything, like, whether the waste products like urine and feces are, converted into ammonium compounds, and the dead decayed matter gets converted into ammonium compounds by a set of bacteria called decay bacteria. Now what happens to this ammonium compound? It can't get wasted. It has to be made in the absorbable form. Now plants can't absorb. Plants, they cannot absorb ammonium. They can absorb only nitrates. So now how can the ammonium compounds be converted into nitrates? So there you go. Here you have your nitrifying bacteria which plays the role. So nitrifying bacteria, what do? They convert the ammonium compounds to nitrates. So ammonium compounds are converted to nitrates. So this process is called nitrification. This process is called nitrification. So once it's converted to nitrates, plants are going to absorb it, and so the cycle goes on and on. So let's get back now. So let's see what's happening. So here you go. You have the nitrogen cycle. Okay, so nitrogen in the air. Okay, let's clean this up. So nitrogen in the cycle, it gets fixed through two ways in the soil. So one is the lightening, L-I-G-H-T, okay, the lightening, and the other is the nitrogen fixing bacteria. Since lightning is involved, this is called atmospheric nitrogen. It's called the atmospheric fixation. It's called the atmospheric fixation. And since bacteria is involved, it is called bio. I hope all of you all know. Bio means life, and bacteria is a living organism. So biological fixation. This is called biological fixation. So here you go. We have learned two types of fixation now. So one is by lightning and one by bacteria. So now the nitrogen has okay. Now when we were talking about the nitrogen fixing bacteria, what happens is this bacteria, nitrogen fixing bacteria, they are found free living. They are either found free living in the soil, or they are also found in the root nodules of certain plants. Okay, so this nitrogen fixing bacteria, they are either found free living, or they are found in the plants, root nodules. They are found in the root nodules of plants such as peas, beans, legumes. So they are found in the root nodules. So what exactly they do is, they actually take up the nitrogen gas. They take up the nitrogen gas from the atmosphere and they change it into nitrates. So therefore, since life is involved, nitrogen bacteria, fixing bacteria is involved, it's called biological fixation. Okay, now when we were talking about the nitrogen fixing bacteria, what happens is, this bacteria, nitrogen fixing bacteria, they are found free living. They are either found free living in the soil, or they are also found in the root nodules of certain plants. Okay, so this nitrogen fixing bacteria, they are either found free living, or they are found in the plants root nodules. They are found in the root nodules of plants such as peas, beans, legumes. So they are found in the root nodules. So what exactly they do is, they actually take up the nitrogen gas. They take up the nitrogen gas from the atmosphere and they change it into nitrates. They change it into nitrates. So therefore, since life is involved, nitrogen bacteria, fixing bacteria is involved, it's called biological fixation. Now, finally, there is a third type of bacteria which are called the denitrifying bacteria. Denitrifying bacteria. Because when you say something is a cycle, it means it has to be returned to from wherever it comes. So now it's a nitrogen is taken in from the atmosphere and it has to be returned into the atmosphere. So how are we going to do that? So we don't do it, nature does it. So here you have denitrifying bacteria which respires anaerobically. It respires anaerobically, and see how beautifully it takes up all the the nitrates, the nitrites. It takes up all the nitrogen that is the nitrogen that is there in the soil. It takes it up, use it for respiration, and then when it respires, it releases nitrogen back into the atmosphere. It releases nitrogen back into the atmosphere. So this is how, this is the nitrogen cycle. It's a very interesting one, and most of the children find it really tough, although it's kind of really easy. So let's do this again. So here you go. You have the nitrogen that is there, and you have simple three processes which are happening. So nitrogen from the atmosphere gets into the soil. It gets into the soil by two ways, and that's by lightning. And by nitrogen fixing bacteria. Now this bacteria actually fixes the atmospheric nitrogen into the soil. And where do you think these bacteria are present? They are present in the root nodules, and they use the nitrogen that is in the atmosphere for respiration. They get energy when they use it, and they directly fix it into the plant body to make proteins. And here, how does nitrogen get back into the atmosphere? It gets back by denitrification. Hope you understood this, and if you have more questions related to the video that I have uploaded, you can ask me in the box, and I will make sure that I answer all your questions. Thank you.